Good afternoon and welcome to this week's Lunch Break Live with Tea Party Patriots. I'm Jenny Beth Martin with Tea Party Patriots Action. In just a moment, we'll go to Bill Pasco for our Washington Report. Before we do that, please take a moment to share this Facebook Live session with your Facebook friends so they can get the latest from Washington, D.C. And then, as Bill is going through the Washington Report, if you have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email at jenny.beth@teapartypatriots.org. Again, jenny.beth@teapartypatriots.org. And now we're going to Bill Pasco for our Washington Report.
Thank you, Jenny Beth. The House is gone for the August recess and will not return until September 9. The Senate will come back today and stay in session through Thursday. Let's talk about last week in the House. The House came back on Monday and voted on 3 bills under suspension of the rules. 2 passed, 1 did not. On Tuesday, the House took up and passed a rule governing floor consideration of 2 appropriations bills. Then they took up and passed 2 bills under suspension of the rules. And then the House took up H.R. 8997, the Energy and Water Development and Related Agencies Appropriations Act for FY 2025. After considering 17 amendments and agreeing to 3 of them, the House took a break to consider a bill under suspension of the rules. It failed. Then the House took up H.R. 8998, the Department of the Interior, Environment, and Related Agencies Appropriations Act for FY 2025. After considering 6 amendments, none of which were agreed to, the House broke for the night. The House came back on Wednesday and considered 4 more amendments to the Interior Appropriations Bill, one of which was agreed to. Then the House took up and passed a rule. Then, by a vote of 416 to 0, the House took up and passed H.Res. 1367. That bill established a task force on the attempted assassination of former President Trump. Then the House went back to H.R. 8998, the Interior Appropriations Bill, and considered 5 more amendments, one of which was agreed to. Then the House voted by 210 to 205 to pass the bill as amended. On Thursday, the House took up H.Res. 1371. That was a resolution strongly condemning the Biden administration and its border czar, Kamala Harris's failure to secure the United States border. By a vote of 220 to 196, with 6 Democrats crossing party lines to vote with the Republicans, the House passed the measure. And then they were done. And because they were having trouble passing appropriations bills, Speaker Johnson decided to send them home early for their August recess. So the House will not be back in session until September 9. Last week in the Senate came back on Tuesday and voted to confirm Colleen Duffy Kiko to be a member of the Federal Labor Relations Authority. On Wednesday, the Senate voted to invoke cloture on the nominations of Kashi Wei to be a judge of the United States Tax Court, Adam B. Landy to be a judge of the United States Tax Court, and Margaret L. Taylor to be legal advisor of the Department of State. On Thursday, the Senate voted to confirm Kashi Wei to be a judge of the U.S. Tax Court. Then the Senate voted to invoke cloture on the motion to concur in the House amendment to S. 2073 with an amendment, and then they were done. This week in the Senate will come back today with the first vote set for 5:30 p.m. At that time, the Senate will proceed to a roll call vote on confirmation of Adam B. Landy to be a judge of the U.S. Tax Court for a term of 15 years. On Tuesday, the Senate will vote to invoke cloture on the nomination of Stacey D. Newman to be a U.S. District Judge for the District of Maine. Now let's talk more about the aftermath of the shooting. 1 week ago, on Monday morning, House Oversight Committee Chairman James Comer launched into the first congressional oversight hearing of an attempted assassination of a president or former president since the Redskins were winning Super Bowls back in the 1980s. It was not a good day for then Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheatle. I say then because while she refused to resign during the hearing itself, she may as well have done so, if for no other reason than to save herself the embarrassment of hemming and hawing her way through the hearing, insisting that she took responsibility for the failure of the agency she directed to prevent an assassination attempt, while actually refusing to do so. Tuesday, she fixed that. She resigned. Wednesday, FBI Director Chris Wray, who apparently wants to leave his position as FBI director before next February, but doesn't want to resign, so is hoping he can make himself so unappealing to President Trump that he'll be a sure goner if Trump is reelected in November, appeared for testimony before the House Judiciary Committee and declared for no good reason that he wasn't sure Trump had actually been hit by a bullet fired by a would-be assassin's gun. Quote, "There's some question whether or not it's a bullet or shrapnel that hit his ear," end quote, Wray said, before seeming to indicate he thought it was a bullet, continuing, quote, "I don't know whether that bullet, in addition to causing the grazing, could have also landed somewhere else," end quote. It didn't take long for many to become outraged, and within 48 hours, the FBI was asserting definitively, quote, "What struck former President Trump in the ear was a bullet, whether whole or fragmented into smaller pieces, fired from the deceased subject's rifle," end quote. Trump's former White House doctor, Congressman Ronnie Jackson of Texas, who's been treating Trump since the attempt on his life, had contradicted Wray's assertion. Quote, "There is absolutely no evidence that it was anything other than a bullet. Congress should correct the record as confirmed by both the hospital and myself. Director Wray," he continued, "is wrong and inappropriate to suggest anything else," end quote. The hospital in Butler, Pennsylvania, treated Trump for a, quote, "gunshot wound to the right ear," unquote, according to Jackson. On Wednesday, the House approved creation of a bipartisan task force to investigate the attempted assassination. The measure that passed calls for there to be 13 members of the panel, with 7 Republicans and 6 Democrats. Speaker Johnson is ready to name the 7 Republicans, but is waiting for Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries to finalize his selections before making any further announcements. Meanwhile, the Secret Service has encouraged the Trump campaign to, wait for it, give up outdoor rallies. The campaign is not currently planning any outdoor rallies, but has not announced its agreement with the request. Now let's talk about Campaign 2024. What a week it was. Trying to keep up with all the news over the last week regarding the ballot switcheroo that seems to have nabbed the Democrat presidential nomination for Vice President Kamala Harris is like trying to count offenses against Christians at the Paris Olympics. So I'm going to just try to boil down a ton of information to the nuggets you need to know this week. First, Democrats are enthused again in a way we haven't seen since the morning after election night 2022, when they defied expectations and beat back the red wave we were told was coming. We can see that in polling, and we can see that in money raised. The brand new Harris for President campaign says it raised $200 million in its first week, and says further that 66% of the donors were first-time donors, which is both an indication of revived enthusiasm and a gateway to more fundraising down the road. Further, several polls that came out toward the end of the week indicate a tightening of the race, where Trump had previously been leading Biden by about 6 points in national polls. Trump now holds a 1 or 2 point lead over Harris in national polls. Polling in the battleground states, too, seems to have tightened. A week ago, in the ABC News Ipsos poll, Harris was upside down on her fave-unfave. She was 35% favorable, 46% unfavorable, a net negative 11. After God only knows how much Second Coming of Christ coverage over the last week, she's now at 43-42, a net +1. That's a 12-point swing to the positive side in 1 week. Trump and Vance are moving the other way. Trump went in the same week from 35-46, net negative 11, to 35-52, net negative 17. And Vance's decline is even steeper. He went from 25-31, a net negative 6, to 24-39, a net negative 15. The thing is, that movement in the polls is to be expected. In fact, one of the Trump campaign's pollsters, Tony Fabrizio, released a memo early last week predicting just that kind of movement in the polls. We're not going to have a really good idea where this race is until after Labor Day. We've still got 2 more major events to take place: VP Harris's selection of a running mate and the Chicago Democrat Convention. Meanwhile, the Trump campaign is not just sitting around waiting for Harris to gear up. There are now fewer than 100 days left before the election. And Team Trump knows, as we discussed last week, that the first team to define Kamala Harris is likely going to be the side that wins the election. So, last week, Team Trump was spending on advertising, and doing so with gusto. According to figures compiled by the Associated Press, Team Trump outspent Team Harris last week on the airwaves by a ratio of 25-1. And while former President Trump is still testing different themes, I'm willing to bet that at least one of the themes Team Trump is going to settle on is Kamala Harris, San Francisco radical. You can find Jenny Beth's op-ed from Saturday's town hall on that very subject in the suggested reading. On another front, Republican vice presidential nominee Ohio Senator JD Vance is defending himself against attacks based on comments he made to Tucker Carlson when he was running for the Senate from Ohio back in the 2022 cycle. In that interview, Vance questioned why some leading politicians don't have children. He specifically named Kamala Harris as one of them. Parenthetically, Harris is stepmother to her husband's children. Here's what Vance said back then, quote, "The entire future of the Democrats is controlled by people without children. How does it make any sense we've turned our country over to people who don't really have a stake in it? We have a bunch of childless cat ladies who are miserable at their own lives and the choices that they've made, and so they want to make the rest of the country miserable too," end quote. It didn't take long for someone to unearth those comments and shoot them around the internet. I was hearing about it by the end of the convention 10 days ago, and it did nothing but mushroom last week. Vance finally addressed the hubbub by going on the Megyn Kelly podcast, where he didn't apologize at all, but instead chose to double down. Quote, "Obviously, it was a sarcastic comment," he said. Quote, "People are focusing so much on the sarcasm and not the substance of what I actually said. The substance of what I said, Megyn, I'm sorry, it's true. This is about criticizing the Democratic Party for becoming anti-family and anti-children. The simple point that I made is that having children, becoming a father, becoming a mother, I really do think it changes your perspective in a pretty profound way. I'm making an argument that our entire society has become skeptical and even hateful toward the idea of having kids," end quote. Further, he told Kelly, referring directly to Kamala Harris, quote, "I wish her stepchildren and Kamala Harris and her whole family the very best. The point is not that she's lesser. The point is that her party has pursued a set of policies that are profoundly anti-child," end quote. Stay tuned. And now to The Jenny Beth Show. Episode 77 of The Jenny Beth Show dropped last Wednesday, featuring Jenny Beth's conversation with former Georgia State Representative Vernon Jones. Jones, who was elected to the legislature as a Democrat, famously endorsed President Trump for re-election in 2020, and then followed it up with a party switch. He explains his party switch the same way Ronald Reagan did his. He didn't leave the party, he says, the party left him. Vernon Jones is a lifelong conservative who grew increasingly uncomfortable with the Democratic Party and so chose to leave it. It's highly recommended. And that's our Washington Report for this week.
Bill, thank you so much for that Washington Report. And for this week's call to action, please check out our website at teapartypatriots.org. Again, that's teapartypatriots.org. Go there to check out our call to action and any updates we have throughout the week. And we'll see you next week with Lunch Break Live with Tea Party Patriots.